Section 13 of the Animal Storybook. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The Animal Storybook, edited by Andrew Lang. The Taming of an Otter, from Bingley's British Quadrupeds. Otters used once to be very common in England, in the neighbourhood of rivers and even in some instances of the sea, but in many places where they once lived in great numbers, they have now ceased to exist. They destroy large quantities of fish, though they are so dainty that they only care for the upper parts of the body. If the rivers are frozen and no fish are to be had, they will eat poultry or even lambs, and if these are not to be found, they can get on quite well for a long time on the bark of trees or in young branches. Fierce though otters are when brought to bay, they can easily be tamed if they are caught young enough. More than 100 years ago, the monks of Autun in France found a baby otter only a few weeks old, and took it back to the convent and fed it upon milk for nearly 2 months, when it was promoted to soup and fish and vegetables, the food of the good monks. It was not very sociable with strange animals, but it made great friends with a dog and cat who it had known from a baby, and they would play together half the day. At night it had a bed in one of the rooms, but in the day it always preferred a heap of straw when it was tired of running about. Curious to say, this otter was not at all fond of the water, and it was very seldom that it would go near a basin of water that was always carefully left near its bed. When it did, it was only to wash its face and front paws, after which it would go for a run in the courtyard or curl itself to sleep in the sun. Indeed, it seemed to have such an objection to water of all kinds that the monks wondered whether it knew how to swim. So one day, when they were not so busy as usual, some of the brothers took it off to a good-sized pond and waited to see what it would do. The otter smelt about cautiously for a little, and then, recognizing that here was something it had seen before, it ducked its head and wetted its feet as it did in the mornings. This did not satisfy the monks, who threw it right in, upon which it instantly swam to the other shore and came round again to its friends. All tame otters are not, however, as forgetful of the habits and manners of their race as this one was, and in some parts they have even been taught to fish for their masters instead of themselves. Careful directions are given for their proper teaching, and a great deal of patience is needful, because if an animal is once frightened or made angry, there is not much hope of training it afterwards. To begin with, it must be fed while it is very young on milk or soup, and when it gets older on bread and the heads of fishes, and it must get its food from one person only, to whom it will soon get accustomed and attached. The next step is to have a sort of leather bag made, stuffed with wool and shaped like a fish, large enough for the animal to take in its mouth. Finally, he must wear a collar formed on the principle of a slip noose, which can tighten when a long string that is fastened to it is pulled. This is, of course, to teach the otter to drop the fish after he has caught it. The master then leads the otter slowly behind him, till by this means he has learned how to follow, and then he has to be made to understand the meanings of certain words and tones. So the man says to him, "Come here," and pulls the cord. After this has been repeated several times, the otter gradually begins to connect the words with the action. Then the string is dropped, and the otter trots up obediently without it. After that, the sham fish is placed on the ground, and the collar, which seems rather like a horse's bit, is pulled so as to force the mouth open, while the master exclaims, "Take it!" And when the otter is quite perfect in this, which most likely will not happen for a long time, the collar is loosened, and he is told to drop it. Last of all, he is led down to a river with a clear shallow water, where a small dead fish is thrown in. This he catches at once, and then the cord which has been fastened to his neck is gently pulled, and he gives up his prize to his master. Then live fish are put in instead of the dead one, and when they are killed, the otter is given the heads as a reward. Of course, some masters have a special talent for teaching these things, and some otters are specially apt pupils. This must have been the case with the otter belonging to a Mr. Campbell who lived near Inverness. It would sometimes catch 8 or 10 salmon in a day and never attempted to eat them, while a man in Sweden called Nissen and his family lived entirely on the fish that was caught for them by their otter. When he is in his wild state, the otter lives in holes in the rocks or among the roots of trees, though occasionally he has been known to burrow underground, having his door in the water and only a very tiny window opening landwards, so that he may not die of suffocation. End of section 13.
Section 14 of the Animal Storybook. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Rebecca Zimmerman. The Animal Storybook, edited by Andrew Lang. Chapter 14, The Story of Androcles and the Lion, by Miss Eleanor Seller. Many 100 years ago, there lived in the north of Africa a poor Roman slave called Androcles. His master held great power and authority in the country, but he was a hard, cruel man, and his slaves led a very unhappy life. They had little to eat, had to work hard, and were often punished and tortured if they failed to satisfy their master's caprices. For long Androcles had borne with the hardships of his life. But, at last, he could bear it no longer, and he made up his mind to run away. He knew that it was a great risk, for he had no friends in that foreign country with whom he could seek safety and protection, and he was aware that if he was overtaken and caught, he would be put to a cruel death. But even death, he thought, would not be so hard as the life he now led, and it was possible that he might escape to the sea-coast, and somehow some day get back to Rome and find a kinder master. So he waited till the old moon had waned to a tiny gold thread in the skies, and then one dark night he slipped out of his master's house, and creeping through the deserted forum and along the silent town, he passed out of the city into the vineyards and the cornfields lying outside of the walls. In the cool night air he walked rapidly. From time to time he was startled by the sudden barking of a dog, or the sound of voices coming from some late revelers in the villas which stood beside the road along which he hurried. But as he got further into the country, these sounds ceased, and there was silence and darkness all round him. When the sun rose, he had already gone many miles away from the town in which he had been so miserable. But now a new terror oppressed him, the terror of great loneliness. He had gone into a wild, barren country, and there were no signs of human habitation. A thick growth of low trees and thorny mimosa bushes spread out before him, and as he tried to thread his way through them, he was severely scratched, and his scant garments torn by the long thorns. Besides, the sun was very hot, and the trees were not high enough to afford him any shade. He was worn out with hunger and fatigue, and he longed to lie down and rest. But to lie down in that fierce sun would have meant death, and he struggled on, hoping to find some wild berries to eat, and some water to quench his thirst. But when he came out of the scrubwood, he found he was as badly off as before. A long, low line of rocky cliffs rose before him, but there were no houses, and he saw no hope of finding food. He was so tired that he could not wander further, and seeing a cave which looked cool and dark in the side of the cliffs, he crept into it, and stretching his tired limbs on the sandy floor, fell fast asleep. Suddenly, he was awakened by a noise that made his blood turn cold. The roar of a wild beast sounded in his ears, and as he started trembling and in terror to his feet, he beheld a huge tawny lion with great glistening white teeth standing in the entrance of the cave. It was impossible to fly, for the lion barred the way. Immovable with fear, Androcles stood rooted to the spot, waiting for the lion to spring on him and tear him limb from limb. But the lion did not move. Making a low moan as if in great pain, it stood licking its huge paw, from which Androcles now saw that blood was flowing freely. Seeing the poor animal in such pain, and noticing how gentle it seemed, Androcles forgot his own terror, and slowly approached the lion, who held up its paw as if asking the man to help it. Then Androcles saw that a monster thorn had entered the paw, making a deep cut, and causing great pain and swelling. Swiftly but firmly he drew the thorn out, and pressed the swelling to try to stop the flowing of the blood. Relieved from the pain, the lion quietly lay down at Androcles' feet, slowly moving his great bushy tail from side to side, as a dog does when it feels happy and comfortable. From that moment, Androcles and the lion became devoted friends. After lying for a little while at his feet, licking the poor wounded paw, the lion got up and limped out of the cave. A few minutes later it returned with a little dead rabbit in its mouth, which it put down on the floor of the cave beside Androcles. The poor man, who was starving with hunger, cooked the rabbit somehow and ate it. In the evening, led by the lion, he found a place where there was a spring, at which he quenched his dreadful thirst. And so for 3 years Androcles and the lion lived together in the cave, wandering about the woods together by day, sleeping together at night. For in summer the cave was cooler than the woods, and in winter it was warmer. At last the longing in Androcles' heart to live once more with his fellow men became so great that he felt he could remain in the woods no longer, but that he must return to a town and take his chance of being caught and killed as a runaway slave. And so one morning he left the cave and wandered away in the direction where he thought the sea and the large towns lay. But in a few days he was captured by a band of soldiers who were patrolling the country in search of fugitive slaves, and he was put in chains and sent as a prisoner to Rome. Here he was cast into prison and tried for the crime of having run away from his master. He was condemned as a punishment to be torn to pieces by wild beasts on the first public holiday in the great circus at Rome. When the day arrived, Androcles was brought out of his prison, dressed in a simple short tunic, and with a scarf round his right arm. He was given a lance with which to defend himself, a forlorn hope, as he knew that he had to fight with a powerful lion, which had been kept without food for some days to make it more savage and bloodthirsty. As he stepped into the arena of the huge circus, above the sound of the voices of thousands on thousands of spectators, he could hear the savage roar of the wild beasts from their cages below the floor on which he stood. All of a sudden, the silence of expectation fell on the spectators, for a signal had been given, and the cage containing the lion with which Androcles had to fight had been shot up into the arena from the floor below. A moment later, with a fierce spring and a savage roar, the great animal had sprung out of its cage into the arena, and with a bound had rushed at the spot where Androcles stood trembling. But suddenly, as he saw Androcles, the lion stood still, wondering. Then quickly but quietly it approached him and gently moved its tail and licked the man's hands and fawned upon him like a great dog. And Androcles patted the lion's head and gave a sob of recognition, for he knew that it was his own lion, with whom he had lived and lodged all those months and years. And seeing this strange and wonderful meeting between the man and the wild beast, all the people marveled, and the emperor from his high seat above the arena sent for Androcles, and bade him tell his story and explain this mystery. And the emperor was so delighted with the story that he said Androcles was to be released, and to be made a free man from that hour. And he rewarded him with money and ordered that the lion was to belong to him and to accompany him wherever he went. And when the people in Rome met Androcles walking, followed by his faithful lion, they used to point at them and say, "That is the lion, the guest of the man, and that is the man, the doctor of the lion." End of section 14. Recording by Rebecca Zimmerman.
Section 15. of the Animal Storybook, edited by Andrew Lang. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Matt Bishop. The Animal Storybook, edited by Andrew Lang. Monsieur Dumas and His Beasts, Chapters 1 through 3, by Mrs. Lang. Chapter 1. Most people have heard of Alexandre Dumas, the great French novelist who wrote The Three Musketeers and many other delightful historical romances. Besides being a great novelist, M. Dumas was a most kind and generous man, kind both to human beings and to animals. He had a great many pets, of which he gives us the history in one of his books. Here are some of the stories about them in his own words. I was living, he says, at Monte Cristo. This was the name of his villa at Saint Germain's. I lived there alone, except for the visitors I received. I love solitude, for solitude is necessary to anyone who works much. However, I do not like complete loneliness. What I love is that of the Garden of Eden, a solitude peopled with animals. Therefore, in my wilderness at Monte Cristo, without being quite like Adam in every way, I had a kind of small earthly paradise. This is the list of my animals. I had a number of dogs, of which the chief was Pritchard. I had a vulture named Diogenes, 3 monkeys, of which bore the name of a celebrated translator, another of a famous novelist, and the third, which was a female, that of a charming actress. We will call the writer Potiche, the novelist of the last of the Lady Mignots, and the Lady Mademoiselle de Gassens. I had a great blue and yellow macaw named Bouval, and a green and yellow parakeet named Papa Everard, a cat named Missouf, a golden pheasant called Lucullus, and finally a cock called Caesar. Let us give honor where honor is due, and begin with the history of Pritchard. I had an acquaintance named M. Lorat, who, having heard me say I had no dog to take out shooting, said, "Ah, how glad I am to be able to give you something you will really like." A friend of mine who lives in Scotland sent me a pointer of the very best breed. I will give him to you. Bring Pritchard, he added to his 2 little girls. How could I refuse a present offered so cordially? Pritchard was brought in. He was an odd-looking dog to be called a pointer. He was a long-haired, gray and white, with ears nearly erect, mustard-colored eyes, and a beautifully feathered tail. Except for the tail, he could scarcely be called a handsome dog. M. Lorat seemed even more delighted to give the present than I was to receive it, which showed what a good heart he had. The children called the dog Pritchard, he said, but if you don't like the name, call him what you please. I had no objection to the name. My opinion was that if anyone had cause to complain, it was the dog himself. Pritchard therefore continued to be called Pritchard. He was at this time about 9 or 10 months old, and ought to begin his education. So I sent him to a gatekeeper named Vatrin to learn his duties. But 2 hours after I had sent Pritchard to Vatrin, he was back again at my house. He was not made welcome. On the contrary, he received a good beating from Michel, who was my gardener, porter, butler, and confidential servant all in one, and who took Pritchard back to Vatrin. Vatrin was astonished. Pritchard had been shut up with the other dogs in a kennel, and he must have jumped over the enclosure, which was a high one. Early the next morning, when the housemaid had opened my front door, there was Pritchard sitting outside. Michel again beat the dog, and again took him back to Vatrin, who this time put a collar around his neck and chained him up. Michel came back and informed me of this severe but necessary measure. Vatrin sent a message to say that I should not see Pritchard again until his education was finished. The next day, while I was writing in a little summer house in my garden, I heard a furious barking. It was Pritchard fighting with a great Pyrenean sheepdog which another of my friends had just given me. This dog was named Mouton, because of his white woolly hair like a sheep's, not on account of his disposition, which was remarkably savage. Pritchard was rescued by Michel from Mouton's enormous jaws. Once more beaten, and for the third time taken back to Vatrin, Pritchard, it appears, had eaten his collar, though how he managed it Vatrin never knew. He was now shut up in a shed, and unless he ate the walls or the door, he could not possibly get out. He tried both, and, finding the door more digestible, he ate the door, and the next day at dinner-time Pritchard walked into the dining-room wagging his plumy tail, his yellow eyes shining with satisfaction. This time Pritchard was neither beaten nor taken back. We waited till Vatrin should come to hold a council of war as to what should be done with him. The next day Vatrin appeared. "Did you ever see such a rascal?" he began. Vatrin was so excited that he had forgotten to say "Good morning" or "How do you do?" "I tell you," he said, "that rascal Pritchard puts me in such a rage that I have crunched the stem of my pipe 3 times between my teeth and broken it, and my wife has had to tie it up with string. He'll ruin me in pipes, that brute, that vagabond. Pritchard, do you hear what is said about you?" said I. Pritchard heard, but perhaps did not think it mattered much about Vatrin's pipes, for he only looked at me affectionately and beat upon the ground with his tail. "I don't know what to do with him," said Vatrin. "If I keep him, he'll eat holes in the house. I suppose, yet I don't like to give him up. He's only a dog. It's humiliating for a man, don't you know?" "I'll tell you what, Vatrin," said I. "We will take him down to Vézenay and go for a walk through your preserves, and then we will see whether it is worth while to take any more trouble with this vagabond, as you call him. I call him by his name. It oughtn't be Pritchard. It should be Bluebeard. It should be Blunderbore. It should be Judas Iscariot." Vatrin enumerated all the greatest villains he could think of at the moment. I called Michel. "Michel, give me my shooting shoes and gaiters. We will go to Vézenay to see what Pritchard can do." "You will see, sir," said Michel, "that you'll be better pleased than you think," for Michel always had a liking for Pritchard. We went down a steep hill to Vézenay. Michel followed with Pritchard on a leash. At the steepest place I turned round. "Look there upon the bridge in front of us, Michel," I said. "There is a dog very like Pritchard." Michel looked behind him. There was nothing but the leather straps in his hand. Pritchard had cut it through with his teeth, and was now standing on the bridge amusing himself by looking at the water through the railing. "He is a vagabond," said Vatrin. "Look, where is he off to now?" "He has gone," said I, "to see what my neighbor Courrèges has for luncheon." Sure enough, the next moment Pritchard was seen coming out of M. Courrèges' back door, pursued by a maid servant with her broom. He had a veal cutlet in his mouth, which he had just taken out of the frying pan. "Monsieur Dumas!" cried the maid. "Monsieur Dumas! Stop your dog!" We tried, but Pritchard passed between Michel and me like a flash of lightning. "It seems," said Michel, "that he likes his veal underdone." "My good woman," I said to the cook, who was still pursuing Pritchard, "I fear that you are losing time, and that you will never see your cutlet again." "Well then, let me tell you, sir, that you have no right to keep and feed a thief like that. It is you, my good woman, who are feeding him today, not I." "Me?" said the cook. It's M. Courrèges. And what will M. Courrèges say? I should like to know." "He will say, like Michel, that it seems Pritchard likes his veal underdone." "Well, but he'll not be pleased. He will think it's my fault." "Never mind. I will invite your master to luncheon with me. All the same, if your dog goes on like that, he will come to a bad end. That is all I have to say. He will come to a bad end." And she stretched out her broom in an attitude of malediction towards the spot where Pritchard had disappeared. We three stood looking at one another. "Well," said I, "we have lost Pritchard." "We'll soon find him," said Michel. We therefore set off to find Pritchard, whistling and calling to him as we walked on towards Vatron's shooting ground. This search lasted for a good half-hour, Pritchard not taking the slightest notice of our appeals. At last Michel stopped. "Sir," he said, "look there, just come look." "Well, what?" said I, going to him. "Look," said Michel, pointing. I followed the direction of Michel's finger and saw Pritchard in a perfectly immovable attitude, as rigid as if carved in stone. "Vatron," said I, "come here." Vatron came. I showed him Pritchard. "I think he is making a point," said Vatron. Michel thought so too. "But what is he pointing at?" I asked. We cautiously came nearer to Pritchard, who never stirred. "He certainly is pointing," said Vatron. Then, making a sign to me, "Look there," he said. "Do you see anything?" "Nothing." "What? You don't see a rabbit sitting? If only I had my stick, I'd knock it on the head, and it would make a nice stew for your dinner." "Oh," said Michel, "if that's all, I'll cut you a stick." "Well, but Pritchard might leave off pointing." "No fear of him. I'll answer for him, unless, indeed, the rabbit goes away." Vatron proceeded to cut a stick. Pritchard never moved, only from time to time he turned his yellow eyes upon us, which shone like a topaz. "Have patience," said Michel. "Can't you see that M. Vatron is cutting a stick?" And Pritchard seemed to understand as he turned his eye on Vatron. "You have still time to take off the branches," said Michel. When the branches were taken off and the stick was quite finished, Vatron approached cautiously, took a good aim, and struck with all his might into the middle of the tuft of grass where the rabbit was sitting. He had killed it. Pritchard darted in upon the rabbit, but Vatron took it from him, and Michel slipped it into the lining of his coat. This pocket had already held a good many rabbits in its time. Vatron turned to congratulate Pritchard, but he had disappeared. "He's off to find another rabbit," said Michel. And accordingly, after 10 minutes or so, we came upon Pritchard making another point. This time Vatron had a stick ready cut, and after a minute, plunging his hands into a briar bush, he pulled out by the ears a second rabbit. "There, Michel," he said, "put that into your other pocket." "Oh," said Michel, "there's room for 5 more in this one." "Hallo, Michel, people don't say those things before a magistrate." And turning to Vatron, I added, "Let us try once more. Vatron, the number 3 is approved by the gods." "Maybe," said Vatron, "but perhaps it won't be approved by M. Guerin." M. Guerin was the police inspector. Next time we came upon Pritchard pointing, Vatron said, "I wonder how long he would stay like that," and he pulled out his watch. "Well, Vatron," said I, "you shall try the experiment as it is your own vocation, but I am afraid I have not the time to spare." Michel and I then returned home. Vatron followed with Pritchard an hour afterwards. 25 minutes, he called out as soon as he was within hearing, and if the rabbit had not gone away, the dog would have been there now. "Well, Vatron, what do you think of him?" "Why, I say he is a good pointer. He has only to learn to retrieve, and that you can teach him yourself. I need not keep him any longer. Do you hear, Michel?" "Oh, sir," said Michel, "he can do that already. He retrieves like an angel." This failed to convey to me an exact idea of the way in which Pritchard retrieved, but Michel threw a handkerchief, and Pritchard brought it back. He then threw one of the rabbits that Vatron carried, and Pritchard brought back the rabbit. Michel then fetched an egg and placed it on the ground. Pritchard retrieved the egg as he had done the rabbit and the handkerchief. "Well," said Vatrin, "the animal knows all that human skill can teach him. He wants nothing now but practice. And when one thinks," he added, "that if the rascal would only come in to heel, he would be worth 20 pounds if he was worth a penny." "True," I said, with a sigh, "but you may give up hope. Vatrin, that is a thing he will never consent to." Chapter 2. I think that the time has now come to tell my readers a little bit about Mademoiselle de Gossens, Potiche, and the last of the Laid Memoirs. Mademoiselle de Gossens was a tiny monkey. I do not know the place of her birth, but I brought her from Havre, where I had gone, I don't know why, perhaps to look at the sea, but I thought I must bring something home with me from Havre. I was walking there in the quay when at the door of a bird fancier's shop I saw a green monkey and a blue and yellow macaw. The monkey put its paw through the bars of its cage and caught hold of my coat, while the blue parrot turned its head and looked at me in such an affectionate manner that I stopped, holding the monkey's paw with one hand and scratching the parrot's head with the other. The little monkey gently drew my hand within reach of her mouth. The parrot half shut its eyes and made a little purring noise to express its pleasure. "Monsieur Dumas," said the shopman, coming out with the air of a man who was more delighted to sell than I was to buy. "Monsieur Dumas, may I accommodate you with my monkey and my parrot?" It would have been more to the purpose if he had said, "Monsieur Dumas, may I incommode you with my monkey and my parrot?" However, after a little bargaining, I bought both animals, as well as a cage for the monkey and a perch for the parrot. And as soon as I arrived home, I introduced them to Michel. "This," said Michel, "is the green monkey of Senegal, Cercopithecus sabea." I looked at Michel in the greatest astonishment. "Do you know Latin, Michel?" "I don't know Latin, but I do know my dictionary of natural history." "Oh, indeed! And do you know what bird this is?" I asked, showing him the parrot. "To be sure I know it," said Michel. "It is a blue and yellow macaw, Macrocercus arrana." "Oh, sir, why did you not bring a female as well as a male?" "What is the use, Michel, since parrots will not breed in this country?" "There you make a mistake, sir. The blue macaw will breed in France." "In the south, perhaps?" "It need not be in the south, sir." "Where then?" "At Caen." "At Caen? I did not know Caen had a climate which permits parrots to rear their young. Go and fetch my gazetteer." "You will soon see," said Michel as he brought it. I read, "Caen, capital of the department of Calvados, upon the Orne and the Odin, 223 kilometers west of Paris, 41,806 inhabitants." "You will see," said Michel, "the parrots are coming. Great trade in plaster, salt, wood, taken by the English in 1346, retaken by the French N.C., never mind the date. That is all, Michel." "What? Your dictionary never says that the arana, otherwise called the blue macaw, produces young at Caen?" "No, Michel, it does not say that here." "What a dictionary! Just wait till I fetch you mine, and you will see." Michel returned in a few minutes with his book of natural history. "You will soon see, sir," he said, opening his dictionary in his turn. "Parrot, here it is. Parrots are monogamous." "As you know Latin, Michel, of course you know what monogamous means." "That means they can sing scales, Gamut, I suppose." "Well, no, Michel, not exactly. It means that they only have one wife." "Indeed, sir. That is because they talk like us most likely. Now I have found the place. It was long believed that parrots were incapable of breeding in Europe, but the contrary has been proven on a pair of blue macaws which lived at Caen. M. Lamerouse furnishes the details of these results. Let us hear the details which M. Lamerouse furnishes. "These macaws, from March 1818 until August 1822, including a period of 4 years and a half, laid, in all, 62 eggs. Michel, I never said they did not lay eggs. What I said was, out of this number, continued Michel in a loud voice, 25 young macaws were hatched, of which only 10 died. The others lived and continued perfectly healthy. Michel, I confess to having entertained false ideas on the subject of macaws. They laid at all seasons of the year, continued Michel, and more eggs were hatched in the latter than in the former years. Michel, I have no more to say. The number of eggs in the nest varied. There have been as many as 6 at a time. Michel, I yield, rescue or no rescue. Only, said Michel, shutting the book, you must be careful not to give them bitter almonds or parsley. No bitter almonds, I answered, because they contain prussic acid. But why not parsley? Michel, who had kept his thumb on the page, reopened the book. Parsley and bitter almonds, he read, are a violent poison to parrots. All right, Michel, I shall remember. I remembered so well that some time after, hearing that M. Purcell had died suddenly, Purcell being the French for parsley, I exclaimed, much shocked, "Ah, poor man, how unfortunate! He must have been eating parrot." However, the news was afterwards contradicted. The next day I desired Michel to tell the carpenter to make a new cage for Mademoiselle de Gossens, who would certainly die of cramp if left in her small travelling cage. But Michel, with a solemn face, said it was unnecessary. "For," he said, "I am sorry to tell you, sir, that a misfortune has happened. A weasel has killed the golden pheasant. You will, however, have it for your dinner today." I did not refuse, though the prospect of this repast caused me no great pleasure. I am very fond of game, but somehow prefer pheasants which have been shot to those killed by weasels. "Then," said I, "if the cage is empty, let us put in a monkey." We brought the little cage close to the big cage, and opened the doors. The monkey sprang into her new abode, bounded from perch to perch, and then came and looked at me through the bars, making grimaces and uttering plaintive cries. "She is unhappy without a companion," said Michel. "Suppose we give her the parrot. You know that little boy, an Auvergnat, who comes here with his monkey asking for pennies. If I were you, sir, I would buy that monkey. And why that monkey rather than another? He has been so well educated and is so gentle. He has a cap with a feather, and he takes it off when you give him a nut or a bit of sugar. Can he do anything else? He can fight a duel. Is that all? No, he can also catch fleas on his master. But, Michel, do you think that that youth would part with so useful an animal? We can but ask him, and there he is at this moment." And he called to the boy to come in. The monkey was sitting on a box which the little boy carried on his back, and when his master took off his cap, the monkey did the same. It had a nice, gentle little face, and I remarked to Michel that it was very like a well-known translator of my acquaintance. "If I have the happiness to become the owner of this charming animal," I continued, "we will call it Potiche." And giving Michel 40 francs, I left him to make his bargain with the little Auvergnat. Chapter 3. I had not entered my study since my return from Havre, and there is always a pleasure in coming home again after an absence. I was glad to come back, and looked about me with a pleasured smile, feeling sure that the furniture and ornaments of the room, if they could speak, would say they were glad to see me again. As I glanced from one familiar object to another, I saw upon a seat by the fire a thing like a black and white muff, which I had never seen before. When I came closer, I saw that the muff was a little cat, curled up half asleep and purring loudly. I called the cook, whose name was Madame Lamarque. She came in after a minute or two. "So sorry to have kept you waiting, but you see, sir, I was making a white sauce, And you who can cook yourself know how quickly those sauces curdle if you are not looking after them. Yes, I know that, Madame Lamarck. But what I do not know is where this new guest of mine comes from. And I pointed to the cat. Ah, sir, said Madame Lamarck in a sentimental tone, that is Antony. An Antony? Madame Lamarck, what is that? In other words, an orphan, a foundling, sir. Poor little beast. I felt sure that would interest you, sir. And where did you find it, Madame Lamarck? In the cellar. I heard a little cry, meow, 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 and I said to myself, that must be a cat. No, did you actually say that? Yes, and I went down myself, sir, and I found the poor little thing behind the sticks. Then I recollected how you had once said, we ought to have a cat in the house. Did I say so? I think you are making a mistake, Madame Lamarck. Indeed, sir, you did say so. Then I said to myself, Providence has sent us the cat which my master wishes for. And now there is one question I must ask you, sir. What shall we call the cat? We will call it Missouf, if you have no objection. And please be careful, Madame Lamarck, that it does not eat my quails and turtle-doves or any of my little foreign birds. If M. Dumas is afraid of that, said Michel, coming in, there is a method of preventing cats from eating birds. And what is the method, my good friend? You have a bird in a cage. Very well. You cover 3 sides of the cage. You make a gridiron red hot. You put it against the uncovered side of the cage. You let out the cat and you leave the room. The cat, when it makes its spring, jumps against the hot gridiron. The hotter the gridiron is, the better the cat is afterwards. Thank you, Michel. And what of the troubadour and his monkey? To be sure, I was coming to tell you about that. It is all right, sir. You are to have potash for 40 francs. Only you must give the boy 2 white mice and a guinea pig in return. But where am I to find 2 white mice and a guinea pig? If you will leave the commission to me, I will see that they are found. I left the commission to Michel. If you won't think me impertinent, sir, said Madame Lamarck, I should so like to know what Missouf means. Missouf means just Missouf, Madame Lamarck. It's a cat's name, then? Certainly, since Missouf the First was so called. It is true, Madame Lamarck, you never knew Missouf. And I became so thoughtful that Madame Lamarck was kind enough to withdraw quietly, without asking any questions about Missouf the First. That name had taken me back to 15 years ago, when my mother was still living. I had then the great happiness of having a mother to scold me sometimes. At the time I speak of, I had a situation in the service of the Duc d'Orléans, and the salary of 1,500 francs. My work occupied me from 10 in the morning until 5 in the afternoon. We had a cat in those days whose name was Missouf. This cat had missed his vocation. He ought to have been a dog. Every morning I started my office at 9:30 and came back every evening at 5:30. Every morning Missouf followed me to the corner of a particular street, and every evening I found him in the same street, at the same corner, waiting for me. Now the curious thing was that on the days when I had found some amusement elsewhere, and was not coming home to dinner, it was no use to open the door for Missouf to go and meet me. Side note: a remarkable instance of telepathy in the cat, A.L. Missouf, in the attitude of the serpent with its tail in its mouth, refused to sit from his cushion. On the other hand, the days I did come, Missouf would scratch at the door until someone opened it for him. My mother was very fond of Missouf. She used to call him her barometer. Missouf marks my good and my bad weather. My dear mother would say, the days you come in are my days of sunshine. My rainy days are when you stay away. When I came home, I used to see Missouf at the street corner, sitting quite still and gazing into the distance. As soon as he caught sight of me, he began to move his tail. Then, as I drew nearer, he rose and walked backwards and forwards across the pavement with his back arched and his tail in the air. When I reached him, he jumped up upon me as a dog would have done, and bounded and played round me as I walked towards the house. But when I was close to it, he dashed in at full speed. 2 seconds after, I used to see my mother at the door. Never again in this world, but in the next perhaps, I shall see her standing waiting for me at the door. That is what I was thinking of, dear readers, when the name of Missouf brought back all those recollections, so you understand why I did not answer Madame Lamarck's questions. Henceforth Missouf II enjoyed the same privileges that Missouf I had done, although, as will be seen later, he was not distinguished by similar virtues, but was in fact a very different sort of cat. End of section 15. Section 16 of the Animal Story Book, edited by Andrew Lang. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Matt Bishop. Section 16 of the Animal Story Book, Monsieur Dumas and His Beasts, Chapters 4 through 6, by Mrs. Lang. Chapter 4. The following Sunday, when my son Alexandra and 1 or 2 intimate friends were assembled in my room, a second Avignon boy with a second monkey demanded admittance, and said that a friend having told him that M. Dumas had bought his monkey for 40 francs, 2 white mice, and a guinea pig, he was prepared to offer his for the same price. My friends urged me to buy the second monkey. "Do buy this charming creature," said my artist friend Geroux. "Yes, do buy this ridiculous little beast," said Alexandra. "Buy him, indeed," said I. "Have I 40 francs to give away every day, to say nothing of a guinea pig and 2 white mice?" "Gentlemen," said Alexandra, "I am sorry to tell you that my father is, without exception, the most avaricious man living." My guest exclaimed, but Alexandra said that one day he would prove the truth of his assertion. I was now called upon to admire the monkey, and to remark how like he was to a friend of ours. Geroux, who was painting a portrait of this gentleman, said that if I would let the monkey sit to him, it would help him very much in his work, and Mackay, another of my guests, offered amidst general applause to make me a present of it. Side note, Mackay, the immortal Augustus Macquet. This decided me. "You see," said Alexandra, "he accepts." "Come, young man," I said to the Avignon, "embrace your monkey for the last time, and if you have any tears to shed, shed them without delay." When the full price was paid, the boy made an attempt to do as I told him, but the last of the Laidmanoirs refused to be embraced by his former master, and as soon as the latter had gone away, he seemed delighted and began to dance, while Mademoiselle Degassens in her cage, too, danced with all her might. "Look," said Mackay, "they like each other. Let us complete the happiness of these interesting animals." We shut them up in their cage together, to the great delight of Mademoiselle Degassens, who did not care for Potiche, and much preferred her new admirer. Potiche indeed showed signs of jealousy, but not being armed with the sword which he used to have when he fought duels, he could not wash out his affronts in the blood of his rival, but become a prey to silent melancholy and wounded affection. While we were still looking at the monkeys, a servant came in bringing a tray with wine and seltzer water. "I say," said Alexandra, "let us make Mademoiselle Degassens open the seltzer water bottle." And he put the bottle inside the cage on the floor. No sooner had he done so than all 3 monkeys surrounded it and looked at it with the greatest curiosity. Mademoiselle Degassens was the first to understand something would happen if she undid the 4 crossed wires which held down the cork. She accordingly set to work, first with her fingers, and then with her teeth, and it was not long before she undid the first 3. She next attacked the 4th, while the whole company, both men and monkeys, watched her proceedings with breathless attention. Presently a frightful explosion was heard. Mademoiselle de Gossens was knocked over by the cork and drenched with seltzer water, while Potish and the last of the Lady Manoirs fled to the top of their cages, uttering piercing cries. "Oh!" cried Alexandra, "I'll give my share of seltzer water to see her open another bottle." Mademoiselle de Gossens had got up, shaken herself, and gone to rejoin her companions, who were still howling lamentably. "You don't suppose she'll let herself be caught a second time?" said Giroux. "Do you know," said Mackay, "I should not wonder if she would. I believe her curiosity would still be stronger than her fear." "Monkeys," said Michel, who had come in on hearing their cries, "are more obstinate than mules. The more seltzer water bottles you give them, the more they will uncork. Do you think so, Michel?" "You know, of course. How can they catch them in their own country?" "No, Michel." "What! You don't know that, gentlemen?" said Michel, full of compassion for our ignorance. "You know that monkeys are very fond of Indian corn. Well, you put some Indian corn into a bottle, the neck of which is just large enough to admit a monkey's paw. He sees the Indian corn through the glass. Well, Michel, he puts his hand inside and takes a good handful of Indian corn. At that moment the hunter shows himself. They are so obstinate, the monkeys, I mean, they won't let go of what they have in their hand. But as they can't draw their closed fist through the opening, there they are, you see, caught. Well then, Michel, if ever our monkeys get out, you will know how to catch them again." "Oh, no fear, sir. That is just what I shall do." The seltzer water experiment was successfully repeated, to the triumph of Michel and the delight of Alexandre, who wished to go on doing it, but I forbade it, seeing that poor Mademoiselle de Gossens' nose was bleeding from the blow of the cork. "It is not that," said Alexandra. "It is because you judge your seltzer water. I have already remarked, gentlemen, that my father is, I regret to say, an exceedingly avaricious man." Chapter 5. It is now my painful duty to give my readers some account of the infamous conduct of Missouf II. One morning, on waking rather late, I saw my bedroom door gently opened, and the head of Michel thrust in, wearing such a concerned expression that I knew at once that something was wrong. "What has happened, Michel?" "Why, sir, those villains of monkeys have managed to twist a bar of their cage, I don't know how, until they have made a great hole, and now they have escaped." "Well, but, Michel, we foresaw that this might occur, and now you have only to buy your Indian corn and to procure 3 bottles the right size." "Ah, you are laughing, sir," said Michel, reproachfully. "But you won't laugh when you know all. They opened the door of the aviary." "And so my birds have flown away?" "Sir, your 6 pairs of turtle doves, your 14 quails, and all your little foreign birds are eaten up." Side note: let the reader compare the conduct of Mr. Gully later. "But monkeys won't eat birds." "No, but Master Missouf will, and he has done it." "The deuce he has! I must see for myself." "Yes, go for yourself, sir. You will see a sight, a field of battle, a massacre of Saint Bartholomew." As I was coming out, Michel stopped me to point to Potish, who had hung himself by the tail to the branch of a maple, and was swinging gracefully to and fro. Mademoiselle de Gossens was bounding gaily about in the aviary, while the last of the Laidenoirs was practicing gymnastics on the top of the greenhouse. "Well, Michel, we must catch them. I will manage the last of the Laidenoirs if you will get hold of Mademoiselle de Gossens. As to poor little Potish, he will come of his own accord. I wouldn't trust him, sir. He is a hypocrite. He has made it up with the other one. Just think of that." "What? He has made friends with his rival in the affections of Mademoiselle de Gossens?" "Just so, sir. This is sad indeed, Michel. I thought only human beings could be guilty of so mean an action. You see, sir, these monkeys have frequented the society of human beings. I now advanced upon the last of the Lade Manoirs with so much precaution that I contrived to shut him into the greenhouse, where he retreated into a corner and prepared to defend himself, while Potish, from the outside, encouraged his friend by making horrible faces at me through the glass. At this moment, piercing shrieks were heard from Mademoiselle de Gassens. Michel had just caught her. These cries so enraged the last of the Lade Manoirs that he dashed out upon me, but I parried his attack with the palm of my hand, with which he came in contact so forcibly that he lost breath for a minute, and then I picked him up by the scruff of the neck. "Have you caught Mademoiselle de Gassens?" I shouted to Michel. "Have you caught the last of the Lade Manoirs?" returned he. "Yes," we both replied in turn, and each bearing his prisoner, we returned to the cage, which had in the meantime been mended, and shut them up once more, while Potish, without lamentations, fled to the top of the highest tree in the garden. No sooner, however, did he find that his two companions were unable to get out of their cage, than he came down from his tree, approached Michel in a timid and sidelong manner, and with clasped hands and little plaintive cries, entreated to be shut up again with his friends. "Just see what a hypocrite he is," said Michel. But I was of opinion that the conduct of Potish was prompted by devotion rather than hypocrisy. I compared it to that of Regulus, who returned to Carthage to keep his promised word, or to King John of France, who voluntarily gave himself up to the English for the Countess of Salisbury's sake. Michel continued to think Potish a hypocrite, but on account of his repentance he was forgiven. He was put back into the cage, where Mademoiselle de Gassens took very little notice of him. All this time Missouf had been forgotten, calmly remained in the aviary, and continued to crunch the bones of his victims with the most hardened indifference. It was easy enough to catch him. We shut him into the aviary, and held a council as to what should be his punishment. Michel was of opinion that he should be shot forthwith. I was, however, opposed to this immediate execution, and resolved to wait until the following Sunday, and then to cause Missouf to be formally tried by my assembled friends. The condemnation was therefore postponed. In the meantime Missouf remained a prisoner in the very spot where his crimes had been committed. He continued, however, to refresh himself with the remains of his victims without apparent remorse, but Michel removed all the bodies and confined him to a diet of bread and water. Next Sunday, having convoked a council of all my friends, the trial was proceeded with. Michel was appointed Chief Justice, and Nogent Saint Laurent was counsel to the prisoner. I may remark that the jury were inclined to find a verdict of guilty, and after the first speech of the judge, the capital sentence seemed almost certain. But the skilful advocate, in a long and eloquent speech, brought clearly before us the innocence of Missouf, the malice of the monkeys, their quickness and incessant activity compared with the less inventive minds of cats. He showed us that Missouf was incapable of contemplating such a crime. He described him wrapped in peaceful sleep, then suddenly aroused from his innocent slumber by the abandoned creatures who, living as they did opposite the aviary, had doubtless long harbored their diabolical designs. We saw Missouf but half awake, still purring innocently, opening his pink mouth, from which protruded a tongue like that of a hare-licked lion. He shakes his ears, a proof that he rejects the infamous proposal that is being made to him. He listens. At first he refuses. The advocate insists that the prisoner had begun by refusing, then, naturally yielding, hardly more than a kitten, corrupted as he had been by the cook, who insisted on feeding him milk or a little weak broth, as she had been told to do, had recklessly excited his carnivorous appetite by giving him pieces of liver and parings of raw chops. The unfortunate young cat yields little by little, prompted more by good nature and weakness of mind than by cruelty or greed, and only half awake, he does the bidding of the villainous monkeys, the real instigators of the crime. The council here took the prisoner in his arms, showed us his paws, and defied any anatomist to say that with paws so made, an animal could possibly open a door that was bolted. Finally, he borrowed Michel's Dictionary of Natural History, opened it at the article cat, domestic cat, wild cat. He proved that Missouf was no wild cat, seeing that nature had robed him in white, the color of innocence. Then, smiting the book with vehemence, "Cat," he exclaimed, "cat! You shall now hear, gentlemen, what the illustrious Buffon, the man with lace sleeves, has to say about the cat." "The cat," says M. de Buffon, "is not to be trusted, but it is kept to rid the house of enemies which cannot otherwise be destroyed. Although the cat, especially when young, is pleasing, nature has given it perverse and untrustworthy qualities which increase with age, and with education may conceal, but will not eradicate." "Well then," exclaimed the orator, after having read this passage, "what more remains to be said? Did poor Missouf come here with a false character seeking a situation? Was it not the cook herself who found him, who took him by force from the heap of sticks behind which he had sought refuge? It was merely to interest and touch the heart of her master that she described him mewing in the cellar. We must reflect also that those unhappy birds, his victims, I allude especially the quails, which are eaten by man, though their death is doubtless much to be deplored, yet they have felt themselves liable to death at any moment, and are now released from their terrors they experienced every time they saw Cook approaching their retreat. Finally, gentlemen, I appeal to your justice, and I think you will now admit that the interesting and unfortunate Missouf has but yielded not only to uncontrollable natural instincts, but also to foreign influence. I claim for my client the plea of extenuating circumstances." The council's pleading was received with cries of applause, and Missouf, found guilty of the complicity in the murders of the quails, turtle-doves, and other birds of different species, but with extenuating circumstances, was sentenced only to 5 years of monkeys. Chapter 6. The next winter, certain circumstances with which I need not trouble my readers led to my making a journey to Algiers. I seldom make a long journey without bringing home some animal to add to my collection, and accordingly I returned from Africa accompanied by a vulture, which I bought from a little boy who called himself a Beni Mouffetard. I paid 10 francs for the vulture, and made the Beni Mouffetard a present of 2 more, in return for which he warned me that my vulture was excessively savage, and had already bitten off the thumb of an Arab and the tail of a dog. I promised to be very careful, and the next day I became the possessor of a magnificent vulture, whose only fault consisted in a strong desire to tear in pieces everybody who came near him. I bestowed on him the name of his compatriot, Jugurtha. He had a chain fastened to his leg, and had for further security been placed in a large cage made of spars. In this cage he travelled quite safely as far as Philippeville, without any other accident than that he nearly bit off the finger of a passenger who had tried to make friends with him. At Philippeville a difficulty arose. It was 3 miles from Stora, the port where we were to embark, and the diligence did not go on so far. I and several other gentlemen thought that we would like to walk to Stora, the scenery being beautiful, and the distance not very great. But what was I to do about Jugurtha? I could not ask a porter to carry the cage. Jugurtha would certainly have eaten him through the spars. I thought of a plan. It was to lengthen his chain 8 or 10 feet by means of a cord, and then to drive him in front of me with a long pole. But the first difficulty was to induce Jugurtha to come out of his cage. None of us dared put our hands within reach of his beak. However, I managed to fasten the cord to his chain, Then I made 2 men armed with pickaxes break away the spars. Jugurtha, finding himself free, spread out his wings to fly away, but he could of course only fly as far as his cord would permit. Now Jugurtha was a very intelligent creature. He saw that there was an obstacle in the way of his liberty, and that I was that obstacle. He therefore turned upon me with fury, in the hope of putting me to flight, or devouring me in case of resistance. I, however, was no less sagacious than Jugurtha. I had foreseen the attack, and provided myself with a good switch made of dogwood, as thick as one's forefinger, and 8 feet long. With this switch I parried Jugurtha's attack, which astounded but did not stop him. However, a second blow, given with all my force, made him stop short, and a third caused him to fly in the opposite direction, that is, towards Stora. Once launched upon this road, I had only to use my switch adroitly to make Jugurtha proceed at about the same pace as we did ourselves, to the great admiration of my fellow travelers, and of all the people whom we met on the road. On our arrival at Stora, Jugurtha made no difficulty about getting on board the steamer, and when tied to the mast, waited calmly while a new cage was made for him. He went into it of his own accord, received with gratitude the pieces of meat which the ship's cook gave him, and 3 days after his embarkation he became so tame that he used to present me with his head to scratch, as a parrot does. I brought Jugurtha home without further adventure, and committed him to the charge of Michel. It was not until my return from Algiers on this occasion that I went to live at Monte Cristo, the building of which had been finished during my absence. Up to this time I had lived in a smaller house called the Villa Medicis, and while the other was building, Michel made arrangements for the proper lodgings of all my animals, for he was much more occupied about their comfort than he was about mine or even his own. They had all plenty of room, particularly the dogs, who were not confined by any sort of enclosure, and Pritchard, who was naturally generous, kept open house with a truly Scottish hospitality. It was his custom to sit in the middle of the road and salute every dog that passed with a little unfriendly growl, smelling him, and permitting himself to be smelt in a ceremonious manner. When a mutual sympathy had been produced by this means, a conversation something like this would begin. "Have you a good master?" asked the strange dog. "Not bad," Pritchard would reply. "Does your master feed you well?" "Well, one has porridge twice a day, bones at breakfast and dinner, and anything one can pick up in the kitchen besides." The stranger licks his lips. "You are not badly off," said he. "I do not complain," replied Pritchard. Then, seeing the strange dog look pensive, he added, "Would you like to dine with us?" The invitation was accepted at once, for dogs do not wait to be pressed, like some foolish human beings. At dinner time Pritchard came in, followed by the unknown dog, who, like Pritchard, placed himself beside my chair, and scratched my knee with his paw in such a confiding way that I felt sure that Pritchard must have been commending my benevolence. The dog, after spending a pleasant evening, found that it was rather too late to return home, so slept comfortably on the grass after his good supper. Next morning he took 2 or 3 steps as if to go away. Then, changing his mind, he inquired of Pritchard, "Should I be much in the way if I stayed on here?" Pritchard replied, "You could quite well, with management, make them believe you are the neighbor's dog, and, after 2 or 3 days, nobody would know you did not belong to the house. You might live here just as well as those idle, useless monkeys, who do nothing but amuse themselves, or that greedy vulture, who eats tripe all day long, or that idiot macaw, who is always screaming about nothing." The dog stayed, keeping in the background at first, but in a day or 2 he jumped up upon me and followed me everywhere, and there was another guest to feed. That was all. Michel asked me one day if I knew how many dogs there were about the place. I answered that I did not. "Sir," said Michel, "there are 13. That is an unlucky number. Michel, you must see that they do not all dine together, else one of them is sure to die first." "It is not that, though," said Michel. "It is the expense I am thinking of. Why, they would eat an ox a day, all those dogs, and if you will allow me, sir, I will just take a whip and put the whole pack to the door tomorrow morning. But, Michel, let us do it handsomely. These dogs, after all, do honor the house by staying here. So give them a grand dinner tomorrow. Tell them that it is the farewell banquet, and then, at dessert, put them all to the door. But after all, sir, I cannot put them to the door, because there isn't a door." "Michel," said I, "there are certain things in this world that one must just put up with, to keep up one's character and position. Since all these dogs have come to me, let them stay with me. I don't think they will ruin me, Michel. Only on their own account. You should be careful that there are not 13. "I will drive away one," suggested Michel, "and then there will only be 12. On the contrary, let another come, and then there will be 14. Michel sighed. "It's a regular kennel," he murmured. It was, in fact, a pack of hounds, though rather a mixed one. There was a Russian wolfhound, there was a poodle, a water spaniel, a Spitz, a dachshund with crooked legs, a mongrel terrier, a mongrel King Charles, and a Turkish dog which had no hair on its body, only a tuft upon its head and a tassel at the end of its tail. Our next recruit was a little Maltese terrier named Lisette, which raised the number to 14. After all, the expense of these 14 amounted to rather over £2 a month. A single dinner given to 5 or 6 of my own species would have cost me 3 times as much, and they would have gone away dissatisfied, for, even if they had liked my wine, they would have certainly found fault in my books. Out of this pack of hounds, one became Pritchard's particular friend and Michel's favorite. This was a dachshund with short, crooked legs, a long body, and, as Michel said, the finest voice in the department of Seine-et-Oise. Portugal, that was his name, had in truth the most magnificent bass voice. I used to hear it sometimes in the night when I was writing, and think how that deep-toned, majestic bark would please St. Hubert if he heard it in his grave. But what was Portugal doing at that hour? And why was he awake while the other dogs slumbered? This mystery was revealed one day, when a stewed rabbit was brought me for dinner. I inquired where the rabbit came from. "You thought it good, sir?" Michel asked me with a pleased face. "Excellent. Well, then you can have one just the same every day, sir, if you like." "Every day, Michel? Surely that is almost too much to promise. Besides, I should like, before consuming so many rabbits, to know where they come from." "You shall know that this very night, if you don't mind coming out with me." "Ah, Michel, I have told you before that you are a poacher." "Oh, sir, as to that, I am as innocent as a baby, and, as I was saying, if you will only come out with me tonight—" "Must I go far, Michel?" "Not 100 yards, sir." "At what o'clock?" "Just at the moment when you hear Portugal's first bark." "Very well, Michel, I will be with you." I had nearly forgotten this promise, and was writing as usual, when Michel came into my study. It was about 11 o'clock, and a fine moonlight night. "Hallo," said I, "Portugal hasn't barked yet, has he?" "No, but I was just thinking that if you waited for that, you would miss seeing something curious." "What should I miss, Michel?" "The council of war which is held between Pritchard and Portugal." I followed Michel, And sure enough, among the 14 dogs, which were mostly sleeping in different attitudes, Portugal and Pritchard were sitting up, and seemed to be gravely debating some important question. When the debate was ended, they separated. Portugal went out at the gate to the high road, turned the corner, and disappeared, while Pritchard began deliberately, as if he had plenty of time before him, to follow the little path which led up to a stone quarry. We followed Pritchard, who took no notice of us, though he evidently knew we were there. He went up to the top of the quarry, examined and smelt about over the ground with great care, and when he had found a scent and assured himself that it was fresh, he lay down flat and waited. Almost at the same moment, Portugal's first bark was heard some 200 yards off. Now the plan the 2 dogs had laid was clear to us. The rabbits came out of their holes in the quarry every evening to go to their feeding ground. Pritchard found the scent of one. Portugal then made a wide circuit, found and chased the rabbit, and as a rabbit or a hare always comes back upon its former track, Pritchard, lying in ambush, awaited its return. Accordingly, as the sound of Portugal's barking came closer, we saw Pritchard's yellow eyes light up and flame like a topaz. Then all of a sudden he made a spring, and we heard a cry of fright and distress. "They've done it," said Michel, and he went to Pritchard, took out of his mouth a nice plump rabbit, gave it a blow behind the ears to finish it, and, opening it on the spot, gave the inside to the 2 dogs, who shared their portion contentedly, although they probably regretted Michel's interference. As Michel told me, I could have eaten a stewed rabbit every day for dinner, if such had been my desire. But after this, events of a different kind were taking place, which obliged me to leave my country pursuits, and I spent about 2 months in Paris. The day before I returned to Saint Germain's, I wrote and told Michel to expect me, and found him waiting for me on the road halfway from the station. "I must tell you, sir," he said, as soon as I was within hearing, "that 2 important events have happened at Monte Cristo since you went away." "Well, Michel, let me hear." "In the first place, Pritchard got his hind foot into a snare, and instead of staying where he was as any other dog would have done, he bit off his foot with his teeth, and so he came home upon 3 legs. "But," said I, much shocked, "is the poor beast dead after such an accident?" "Dead, sir? Was not I there to doctor him?" "And what did you do to him then?" "I cut off the foot properly at the joint with a pruning knife. I then sewed the skin neatly over it, and now you would never know it was off. Look there, the rascal has smelt you and is coming to meet you." And at that moment Pritchard appeared, coming at full gallop, so that, as Michel had said, one would hardly have noticed that he had only 3 feet. My meeting with Pritchard was, as may be supposed, full of deep emotion on both sides. I was sorry for the poor animal. When I had recovered a little, I asked Michel what his other piece of news was. "The latest news, sir, is that Jugurtha's name is no longer Jugurtha." "What is it then?" "It is Diogenes." "And why?" "Look, sir." We had now reached the little avenue of ash trees which formed the entrance to the villa. To the left of the avenue, the vulture was seen walking proudly to and fro in an immense tub, which Michel had made into a house for him. "Ah, now I understand," said I. "Of course, directly he lives in a tub." "That's it," said Michel. "Directly he lives in a tub, he cannot be Jugurtha any more. He must be Diogenes." I admired Michel's historical learning no less than I did his surgical skill, just as the year before I had bowed before his superior knowledge of natural history. End of section 16.